Tales of Legendia, the black sheep of the Tales series, particularly amongst audiences outside of Japan. Developed oddly by the Soul Calibur team rather than Namco's Tales studio, Legendia is an odd jumble of inconsistent quality. Some elements are amongst the best in the series, while others are some of the worst. Tales of Legendia takes place aboard a massive ship called the Legacy in a world consisting mostly of water, with a large main continent and the Legacy acting as a subcontinent. The small continent-sized Legacy is the remnant of an advanced ancient civilization covered in lush vegetation and inhabitants who know little of its true history and purpose, or those who built it aside from legend. The game begins with the main protagonist, Senel Coolidge, and his sister Shirley drifting across the sea before a sudden storm thrusts them onto the shore of the Legacy, where they meet Will Renard. Senel races to save Shirley from her encounter with the saltwater by submerging her in fresh water. It is here that Shirley's mystical properties and mythological identity are brought to light, and her presence on the Legacy slowly untangles a web of forgotten history and an ongoing war. And I do mean slowly. The plot begins with great promise, as the cast of interesting characters, each with their own agendas, is introduced, but the pacing becomes far too slow. Now there's nothing wrong with a slow-paced narrative, but the plot, aside from the Legacy itself, is too generic in the beginning, and without unexpected twists to keep such a pace interesting. There's also a very disjointed comedic thread throughout the beginning of the game. Humor is a welcome addition to any story, and it's utilized more adeptly later in the game, but it feels odd in the early hours.
Islands too!
Exactly right, just what they said, you gotta obey the rules at all times, dig?
What if you break them?
Oh no!
What if you disobey? What'll happen, what'll happen, what'll happen? See? Piece of cake! Ow! What was that for? That hurt!
Far better than the primary narrative is the cast. While some characters like Jay or Moses don't turn out to be quite as interesting as they come across in the early hours of the game, the entire cast is something to add to the ensemble, balancing the personality of one character or another until the whole group finally comes together and clicks like a completed puzzle. Overall, it's actually one of the better casts in the Tales series. No one seems useless or an overt stereotype without any growth beyond that label. Even Shirley, who at first seems like a damsel in distress character, becomes a more fleshed out character that has a very interesting backstory with Senel. Senel Coolidge and Chloe Valens are particularly well written and are two of my favorite Tales characters. The villains, while interesting, are really only interesting when it's discovered how they play a role in some of your party members' individual plot threads. The supporting characters are a mixed bag as well, with a few standouts, and then you have the horrible Orosoren, who are otter-like beings who are more annoying and less endearing versions of Final Fantasy's Muggles. The story does pick up around halfway through, becoming more interesting, complex, and imaginative, but still far from one of the greats of the genre. After beating the game, there are a series of epilogues that add interesting insights into each of the main characters and continue the journey. But the additional insights into the characters would have been more welcome if presented in the main quest itself. This epilogue is also far too drawn out, and has you traveling around the same environments you've already ventured through several times before. I found this extra chapter to be more of a chore to finish than an exciting new adventure with familiar characters. Each mothership title in the Tales series has a defining theme. Legendia's is Where Bonds Spin Legends, and it truly is the bonds between characters that spin the story. Tales of Legendia uses a real-time battle system, similar to a fighting game with RPG elements, such as menu commands in battle, equipping equipment outside, or using the typical Tales title system. Combat moves along a linear plane, which drew criticism at the time as being a step back from the more free-roaming 3D aspects of Tales of Symphonia. While this does indeed feel like a bit of a regression, much of the disdain for Legendia's battle systems seems to come from the bulk of North American Tales fans who started with Symphonia, and don't have the nostalgic factor for the older Tales games like Fantasia on the Super Famicom, or Destiny or Eternia on the PS1, which Legendia's battle system harkens back to. Legendia's combat still feels fun and action-packed. Each character has an arsenal of magic or energy attacks depending on their heirs type, and you can quickly build up a climax meter for an all-out team assault. That being said, the two biggest problems with Legendia's battles are the extreme ease of combat in the first half of the game compared to the sharp increase in difficulty in the second half, as well as the undeniable fact that this is the first Mothership title in the series not to add a single improvement or evolution to the series' battle system. In the worst light, Legendia's combat is a step back, at best, stagnation. Cooking is as present as ever, but doesn't really add anything new to the mix. Puzzles are rather disappointing as well. While a few environmental puzzles in the dungeons are intriguing, they aren't as memorable as in previous Tales games. One unique addition is the duct system. Most areas throughout the Legacy will be connected by way of warp ducts that act as a fast travel mechanic, which is welcome in a game with far too much backtracking. Frequently, the ducts within dungeons will force the player to solve a puzzle to reach the other side. This can at times be bypassed by hitting the start button and selecting, solve the puzzle, but that really takes away from the interesting challenge. These mostly consist of moving blocks and bouncing energy balls using the Sorcerer's Ring off mirrors. Another gameplay element of note are the huge black blobs encountered in certain locations. These mark more difficult pathways or stand in the way of valuable chests. If a random encounter is activated while traversing in one of these blobs, the enemy you encounter will be much harder than those typically encountered in that same area. It's an interesting risk-reward mechanic that I think deserves more praise than it gets. The world itself is unrelentingly linear and limiting. The landscape of the overworld consists primarily of narrow pathways twisting through high hills and other such barriers. It feels almost claustrophobic and allows few chances for exploration. I kept expecting to leave the Legacy for the mainland before the end of the main narrative, but found myself forever stuck backtracking through the same limited number of locations. The one unforgivable sin that sums all this up is Veritas Beacon. Veritas Beacon is a large and interesting town, but is the only true town in the game. That's right, one main town. The only other town or city-like location in the game is the Orosoran village. Veritas Beacon is central to the plot, and after a while it does start to feel kind of like a comforting home base, but it really still just illuminates how limited Legendia's world is compared to its counterparts. Rather than the vast realm full of free space to explore and mysterious secrets to uncover, nestled within webs of side quests, varied and beautiful scenes, Tales of Legendia's world serves only as a linear path from one place to the next filled with mindless random battles. Thankfully, the specific locations are interesting. Visually, Legendia is all over the place. The bandits' hideouts, the misty mountain range, the vast winding innards of the Legacy itself, every location is visually appealing and well designed. There's a good play of light and usage of a lot of hues of purples and blues. The whole game boasts a colorful palette of very pleasing pastels, except the overworld, which is primarily a wash of light green and brown with very little detail. The individual character designs in the skits and portraits are excellent, and the animated cutscenes are stupendous. However, the character models in the field and in combat are rather disappointing. Legendia's visuals get knocked a lot, and while I somewhat agree, I do think some of the negativity is unfair. The character models look like an updated version of the super deformed characters from Final Fantasy VII, and were really an odd choice. While they were a step back from Symphonia's cel-shaded look, many Tales fans outside of Japan don't realize that there were two 2D Tales games released around the same time as the 3D Symphonia. Tales of Destiny 2 was released only a year before Symphonia, and Tales of Rebirth was released between Symphonia and Legendia and was fully sprite-based. Legendia is a step back following the line directly from Symphonia to Legendia to the Abyss, but stylistically, Symphonia to the Abyss would be one path, while Destiny 2 to Rebirth to Legendia could be another. If Legendia had been released even just a few months before Symphonia, its visuals probably would have been praised. It just happened to be getting Legendia after Symphonia that really puts it in a negative light. And even then, while I agree the character models are nowhere near as good, especially in battle, as that of Symphonia, I think the world itself is still pretty close as far as the artistic quality. It's just a different look. The character models are rather odd and should have either remained sprite-based or gone the fully 3D way of later games. In a way, Legendia's visuals are charming in that they feel kind of like those gorgeous PS1 era RPGs on a more powerful system, but in that exact same sense, they're disappointing. and feel outdated.
Surely. Surely. Say something! Surely! What the...
Here's where Tales of Legendia shines brightest. If you spend enough time with the Tales fandom, you quickly realize that the cliché answer for which game has the best overall soundtrack is Legendia, but it's absolutely deserved. While some individual songs from other Tales games are as good if not better than anything you hear here, Legendia's overall soundtrack is consistently brilliant, a sharp contrast to the inconsistent quality of every other element of the game.
You've got me. Give up? Just who do you think you're talking to? Save your threats until after you've tasted my blade. Demon Fang!
Such a reckless little girl to cut down the entire bridge like that.
Lies. All lies.
Nice way to help people.
Quiet, you.
Again, praise be to Legendia's sound department. The skits are fully voiced in English. This is the first such instance in the series in North America, and even some later releases in the series wouldn't accomplish this feat. And on top of that, the voice acting's good. Not perfect, mind you, and not anywhere near the best in the series, but good nonetheless. Tales of Legendia is such an odd game. In the category of sound, it's amazing. Its characters are likable and intriguing, but its story and gameplay are only competent, and its world is claustrophobic and largely uninteresting. And its good visuals clash with the inferior parts. Despite its flaws, I have a soft spot for Legendia that I can't really explain, and if any Tales game were to be remade, I would hope it would be this one more than any other. I'll say it again, Legendia is an odd game. Odd in that it's probably the most inconsistent and flawed game that I would ever openly recommend.